Hey guys, tonight we're settling into something a little colder, a little higher, and a lot quieter than most bedtime stories. Before we drift too far in, if you're genuinely enjoying these late-night history wanderings, you can gently tap like and subscribe, no pressure, only if it feels right. And if you're still awake enough, drop a comment telling me which country you're listening from and what time it is there. Somewhere out there, it's always late, and it's nice to imagine us all sharing the same tired moment. You're standing at the edge of Lake Titicaca as the light begins to soften. The sun sinks low, turning the water into a sheet of dull bronze, and the air feels thin in your lungs, the kind that reminds you, politely but firmly, that you are very far above sea level. This is over 12,000 feet up, and yes, you probably won't survive this style without a jacket, a good meal, and several weeks of acclimatization. The breeze slides off the lake, cold and steady, carrying the faint smell of wet reeds and stone warmed earlier by the sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along the lakeshore, boots crunching softly against pebbles and dried mud. The water laps in a patient rhythm, not hurried, not dramatic, just endlessly present. Lake Titicaca has been here for millions of years, a remnant of ancient seas lifted skyward as the Andes rose. That's a mainstream geological fact, and it matters, because it explains why this place feels less like a lake and more like a small inland ocean that forgot it wasn't supposed to be this high up. As dusk deepens, you begin to understand why humans were drawn here, despite the cold. Fresh water at this altitude is rare, and here it stretches out in shimmering abundance. Fish move beneath the surface. Birds settle into the reeds. Totara plants, tall, green, and endlessly useful, grow thick along the shallows. You can almost feel the ancient calculations happening in some long-ago mind. Water, food, building material, transport. Harsh, yes, but survivable. Maybe even generous, if you're clever. Historians generally agree that long before Tiwanaku became a name whispered with awe, small groups of people began settling around this lake as early as 1500 BCE. They didn't arrive to build monuments. They arrived to live. You imagine them arriving much like you did, cold, tired, scanning the horizon for shelter. Fires would have been lit low to the ground, smoke hugging the air, the smell of burning dung and reeds curling into the night. No grand speeches, no sense of destiny, just people trying to stay warm. You crouch near the shoreline and trail your fingers through the water. It's colder than expected, even after sunset, numbing your skin almost instantly. And yet, this lake never fully freezes. That's one of its quiet miracles. The massive volume of water stabilizes the temperature, creating a microclimate that's slightly kinder than the surrounding high plains. Scholars still argue whether early settlers understood this scientifically or simply noticed, over generations, that crops survived better here than elsewhere. Either way, the lake taught them, slowly. As darkness settles in, the sky begins its nightly performance. Stars prick through the fading blue, sharper and more numerous than you're used to. At this altitude, with so little moisture in the air, the heavens feel closer, heavier somehow. You can see why later Tiwanaku people would align structures to celestial events. Even now, without temples or calendars, the sky demands attention. It's hard not to stare. You walk on, passing what would one day become settlement ground. Right now it's quiet earth, dotted with stones, tufts of grass, and the occasional footprint of a long-gone animal. Llamas and alpacas would eventually wander here, patient and unbothered, providing wool, meat, and transport. A quirky tidbit historians love to mention is that llama caravans functioned like slow, fuzzy freight trucks, moving goods across the Andes at a pace that forced everyone involved to be extremely patient. Bedtime history approved animals honestly. The wind picks up slightly, brushing against your clothes, whispering through reeds. You pull your arms closer to your body, instinctively copying the posture of someone who's done this many times before. That's another thing the lake offers: familiarity. The shoreline curves and bends, offering sheltered coves and predictable patterns. Over time, those patterns become knowledge. Where fish gather, where reeds grow thickest, where storms hit hardest. Survival here isn't about dominance, it's about listening. You imagine the earliest lakeside shelters, simple structures of mud, stone, and plant fibers, nothing permanent yet, just enough to last a season. Fires burn low, casting orange light on hands, shaping tools, mending nets, soothing children. Laughter happens, quiet and brief. Jokes too, probably about whose turn it is to fetch water in the freezing dark. Humans don't stop being human just because history books haven't noticed them yet. One mainstream fact often overlooked is how interconnected these early lakeside groups already were. Even before Tiwanaku rose, there were shared styles of pottery, tools, and rituals around the lake. Ideas moved across water more easily than across mountains. Canoes made of bundled reeds slid silently over the surface, carrying people, goods, and gossip. You can picture one drifting past you now, its silhouette barely visible, the soft splash of a paddle marking time. Of course, not everything about these early settlements is clear. Historians still argue whether population growth here was steady and peaceful or punctuated by brief collapses and restarts caused by climate shifts. The lake gives, but it also takes. Droughts lower water levels, floods erase shorelines. Living here means accepting uncertainty as part of the deal. As night fully settles, you stop walking and simply stand. The lake is dark now, reflecting only stars and the faint glow of the moon. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls, sharp and sudden, before silence returns. You feel small, but not unwelcome. That's the quiet power of this place. It doesn't care who you are, but it allows you to stay. You take a slow breath, thin air filling your lungs, and let it out just as slowly. This is where the story begins, not with stone monuments or carved gateways, but with water, cold, and people choosing again and again to remain. And as you linger by the shore, you can already sense that the lake is watching back, patient, reflective, and very good at keeping secrets. You don't leave the lakeshore when the night deepens. You stay, because the people you're following stayed too. Morning arrives quietly, a pale light seeping over the water, and with it comes movement. You notice it first in small ways, ripples spreading where nets are lifted, reeds parting as someone steps carefully into the shallows, smoke rising in thin, disciplined lines. These are not wanderers passing through anymore. These are villagers learning how to wake up together. You walk among them without being seen, your feet sinking slightly into damp ground, packed down by years of use. The earliest lakeside settlements are modest, almost shy. Low houses cluster close together, built from layers of mud, stone, and woven plant fibers. Roofs slope gently, designed less for beauty and more for surviving wind that never really stops at this altitude. A mainstream archaeological fact tells us that these communities favored circular or oval dwellings, shapes that held warmth better and resisted collapse when the weather decided to get dramatic. You feel the cold linger even after sunrise. Children huddle near fires, hands stretched out, faces calm but alert. Adults move with practiced efficiency, No wasted steps. Living here means planning everything: food, shelter, clothing around the lake's moods. Fishing happens early, when the water is still and cooperative. Nets made from plant fibers are cast and retrieved slowly, deliberately. No frantic splashing. Fish are shared, not hoarded, because isolation at 12,000 feet is a bad long-term strategy. You follow a path worn smooth by feet and time, leading from the water to small garden plots just beyond the village edge. These early fields are simple, nothing like the engineered landscapes that will come later. But they matter. Quinoa and potatoes grow low to the ground, stubborn and unpretentious, crops well-suited to thin air and cold nights. One widely accepted fact is that potatoes were domesticated in this region, and yes, that means every French fry you've ever eaten owes a quiet thank you to places like this. History is humbling that way. Life here revolves around rhythm. You sense it in the way tasks repeat daily, weekly, seasonally. The lake sets the schedule. When water levels rise, people adjust. When frost threatens, they cover crops with reeds. There's a quiet intelligence in this flexibility. No one is trying to dominate the environment. They're negotiating with it, like polite but firm neighbors. You pause near a cluster of reeds and notice how deeply integrated they are into daily life. Totora reeds become walls, roofs, mats, baskets, even boats. A quirky historical tidbit you might enjoy while drifting off is that bundles of these reeds are layered so cleverly that they float, creating vessels light enough to glide but sturdy enough to carry cargo. Some modern reed boats on Lake Titicaca are still built this way, using techniques passed down for centuries, which is both impressive and slightly intimidating if you're attached to modern safety regulations. The village hums softly. You hear laughter, brief and warm, followed by the scrape of tools against stone. Obsidian blades flash in the light, sharp enough to make precise cuts. These materials don't always come from nearby. Even at this early stage, trade is happening. People walk long distances or paddle across wide stretches of water to exchange goods. Salt, shells, stone, items move hand to hand, story to story. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were purely practical or carried early ritual meaning, small gestures that built trust between distant communities. As the sun climbs higher, the air warms just enough to be comfortable if you're wrapped properly. You notice clothing woven from camelid wool, soft and insulating, dyed in muted earth tones. Llamas and alpacas graze nearby, watched carefully. They're not just animals here, they're companions in survival. You can almost hear someone muttering about how stubborn one of them is today, because some complaints truly are timeless. You walk through the heart of the settlement, where a shared space opens up. This is where food is prepared, tools repaired, decisions discussed. No thrones, no obvious leaders. Authority seems situational, earned through experience, rather than declared. One elder speaks, others listen, then someone else adds a thought. It's collaborative in a way that feels surprisingly modern. Scholars still debate how formal leadership structures developed here, and whether early villages were largely egalitarian or quietly hierarchical beneath the surface. The lake remains ever-present, glinting between buildings, calling people back to it throughout the day. You notice how often eyes drift toward the water, checking its color, its movement. Changes matter. A darker hue might mean deeper currents. Unusual stillness could signal an approaching storm. Knowledge here is observational, accumulated slowly, and passed on casually, often without ceremony. As afternoon fades, the village prepares again for cold. Fires are stoked. Food is shared in thick stews that steam invitingly in the thin air. You stand close enough to feel the warmth on your hands. There's comfort in repetition, comfort in knowing what comes next. For these lakeside communities, Survival isn't dramatic, it's steady, a long conversation with the land that rewards patience. You notice something else too. These villages are positioned carefully, never too far from the water, but never directly exposed. Small rises in the land offer protection from flooding. It's subtle planning, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Mainstream archaeology recognizes this as early environmental adaptation, but standing here, it just feels like common sense, sharpened by experience. Night approaches again, and with it, stories. You sense people gathering closer, voices lowering, faces lit by firelight. These stories aren't written, but they're remembered. Tales of ancestors, of strange lights over the lake, of seasons when fish were scarce and everyone somehow made it through anyway. There's probably at least one exaggerated account involving an enormous fish that definitely got away. Every culture needs those. As stars reappear overhead, brighter than ever, you feel the village settle. People retreat into homes, fires dim, and the lake resumes its quiet breathing. You realize that these early lakeside settlements aren't temporary experiments. They're foundations. Patterns are being set: where to build, how to share, when to move, when to stay, that will echo forward into something much larger. You stand once more at the edge of the water, listening. The village behind you sleeps lightly, ready to wake with the lake. And you understand now that Tiwanaku won't rise suddenly, like a surprise monument. It will grow slowly from places like this, from mornings that look a lot like this one, repeated until history finally takes notice. You move from the village paths toward the spaces where people build, noticing how careful the placement of stone and mud seems. Every structure is modest, yet deliberate. Low walls lean against the wind, corners are reinforced with larger stones, roofs sag gently, but not dangerously. You realize quickly that building here is not about style, it's about survival, and the people have spent generations learning the hard way. The smell of drying mud mingles with reeds, faint and earthy, grounding you in the labor that transforms nature into shelter. Homes are surprisingly simple. Circular or oval, sometimes rectangular, with interiors barely furnished, just enough space for sleeping, cooking, and storing tools. Fire pits sit centrally, low to avoid smoke choking the inhabitants. You can imagine someone adjusting a stone to redirect smoke, muttering under their breath in a language that no one outside this place fully understands. A mainstream historical fact tells you that early Tiwanaku builders mastered a surprisingly resilient mix of clay, sand, and straw for walls, which could withstand both seasonal flooding and cold, gusty nights. You trace your fingers along the rough walls, noting the subtle artistry. Stones interlock without mortar in certain places, and mud is applied so skillfully that it sheds rainwater efficiently. You almost expect a whisper, "Yes, we meant it this way." Scholars still puzzle over exactly how these techniques evolved, whether through trial and error observation, oral tradition, or secret tips handed down in a hushed, almost ritualistic manner. Either way, it's impressive, especially when you imagine this high-altitude wind trying to dismantle the work overnight. Raised platforms appear along the lake's edge, some barely a foot off the ground, others higher, creating tiny terraces. These are multifunctional, drying fish, stacking crops, keeping storage safe from frost and occasional floods. You step carefully onto one and feel the soft give of compacted reeds underneath, reminding you that nothing here is wasted. Every material, stone, mud, fiber, serves several purposes. This is efficiency born from necessity, a lifestyle shaped by altitude, wind, and water. You wander further, noticing the subtle hierarchy of structures. Larger family units occupy sturdier houses, smaller clusters occupy simpler ones. There's no overt power in the architecture yet, but social distinctions are quietly implied. Elders occupy central spaces, younger members inhabit the periphery. A quirky tidbit: some houses have small niches for ceremonial objects, hinting that even the humblest structures carried sacred meaning. Perhaps an amulet to the lake god, or a figurine intended to protect crops. Historians still argue whether these niches were standard in every home or reserved for specific families, a tiny mystery hiding in plain sight. Reeds are integral to every building. Roofs are layered meticulously, tied and weighted to resist wind. Walls might incorporate reed mats for insulation. Some structures even feature small boats tethered nearby, ready for daily travel or emergencies. Walking through this built environment, you notice how fluid it feels. Nothing is rigidly formal, the village adapts naturally, reshaping itself according to water levels, population shifts, and weather patterns. You pause to study a low stone wall curving around a communal space. Children play nearby, weaving around the wall and laughing softly. You realize that even playful activity respects the village's layout. The space is lived in fully but gently, as if everyone knows the rules without needing explicit instruction. Fire pits are aligned to catch warmth efficiently, and smoke carries in a way that discourages insects but doesn't suffocate anyone. Small engineering decisions abound, almost invisible, yet vital. Stonework is occasionally punctuated by decorative touches, not ostentatious, but meaningful. Geometric shapes appear on steps, small carvings on stones embedded in walls. Some scholars suggest these are early religious markers. Others argue they serve as practical identifiers, signaling ownership or purpose. You squint at one triangle carved into a threshold, imagining the hand that made it and the thought behind it. Even if its meaning is lost, it carries intention, a faint echo of someone's care. Raised platforms lead to shallow channels, tiny canals dug into the soft ground, designed to control runoff and prevent flooding. These channels are functional yet elegant in their simplicity, guiding water exactly where it's needed. It's impressive how the builders integrate stone, mud, and earth so seamlessly. One small mishap, and the delicate balance could fail, but generations have refined these systems. Quirky though it may sound, some scholars still debate whether these early platforms were also used for ceremonial purposes, maybe even miniature ritual stages. You can see it vaguely without needing proof. Something about the alignment feels intentional beyond mere utility. By mid-afternoon, the village hums quietly. Smoke drifts from several hearths, children run errands, elders oversee daily tasks. You note that while each building seems isolated, they're linked visually and functionally. Small pathways between homes, shared platforms, subtle grading of ground that directs water and traffic naturally. This design reflects an intimate understanding of both the environment and human behavior, honed over decades. You can almost hear someone thinking, if the wind shifts this way tomorrow, we'll adjust. If the frost comes early, we'll adapt. That mindset is built into every stone, every wall, every reed layer. Night falls again, and the village settles. Fires glow low, shadows stretching across walls shaped by centuries of refinement. You realize the importance of these structures. They're more than shelter. They are lessons in observation, patience, and adaptability. You stand among them, feeling the cold creeping up from the lake, aware that this careful stone and mud, layered with human ingenuity, has allowed life to persist where it could have easily faltered. In this quiet, you feel the pulse of the settlement. Not dramatic, not monumental, but steady and enduring. It whispers a truth. Survival at the lakeshore is as much about clever design as it is about courage. And as you take a slow breath, the wind rustling gently through the reeds, you sense the village is ready for the next chapter, the human mastery of the highland landscape that will eventually shape history itself. You step beyond the clusters of homes, following the faint rise of earth that separates settlement from open water, and notice the subtle geometry of early agriculture. At first glance, it looks like a messy patchwork of mud, reeds, and soil, but as your eyes adjust, you see intentional lines, gentle terraces, and shallow channels. These are the raised fields, early engineering marvels that transform marshy, frost-prone highlands into productive farmland. Walking among them, you can almost feel the rhythm of planting and harvesting, repeated season after season, generation after generation. The air smells faintly of damp earth and organic matter. Small birds flit among the fields, pecking at seeds, their calls bright in the quiet morning. You step carefully along narrow walkways that separate waterlogged plots, noticing the precision with which each canal directs excess water away from plant beds. Mainstream historians confirm that these raised fields, or Suka Kollu, were central to feeding the growing lakeside communities. They increased arable land dramatically, turning a challenging environment into a surprisingly reliable source of food. You trail a hand over the damp soil, marveling at how human ingenuity can quietly reshape a landscape without tearing it apart. Potatoes dominate the plots, but quinoa, barley, and other hardy crops are also present. You watch an elder carefully tending a patch of quinoa, checking each stalk for frost damage or signs of pests. The rhythm of life here is slow but purposeful, dictated by seasons, temperature, and water. Some fringe theories suggest that farmers may have used early frost protection methods, like strategically burning reeds to warm the soil overnight, though historians still argue whether this was widespread or experimental. Either way, the dedication to coaxing food from the highlands is evident everywhere. Water management is key. Channels crisscross the fields, guiding lake water in precise increments, while drainage ditches prevent stagnation. Walking along these waterways, you notice the gentle hum of life, frogs croaking softly, insects skimming the surface, fish occasionally darting in shallow edges. You realize that every inch of this engineered environment is alive, responding to human care, weather, and seasonal rhythms. It's not just farming, it's a conversation with nature, ongoing and delicate. You pause to study a small cluster of mounds, slightly higher than surrounding plots. Raised platforms serve multiple purposes, protecting root crops from frost, storing harvests, and sometimes acting as watch points for the fields. The alignment of mounds, fields, and channels hints at observational knowledge. Scholars still debate how much astronomical observation influenced crop placement, but standing here, you notice subtle patterns that might align with solstices or other celestial events. You smile at the thought that even without formal measurement, human eyes and intuition shaped the land as carefully as any ruler or compass. Children are present in the fields, learning by observation. You watch one try to balance on a narrow walkway, almost falling into a shallow canal, and laugh softly. Play is work here, preparation for adulthood. Everyone contributes. You notice the presence of domesticated animals, llamas wandering nearby, carrying small loads or grazing along marginal areas. Their role isn't limited to transport. They fertilize fields, provide wool, and act as living bridges between village and farmland. It's a full ecosystem, crafted with attention and patience. The work continues into late morning. You see hands gently smoothing mud for embankments, adjusting water flow to prevent erosion, or layering reeds to reinforce fragile soil. It's quiet labor, but each action accumulates into long-term stability. A quirky tidbit: some historians suggest that the ancient farmers may have used fish from the lake as fertilizer, tossing small catches or scraps into the soil. Whether ceremonial, accidental, or practical, it's a reminder that life at the lake blends the ordinary with the ingenious. Scholars still argue over the scale and frequency of this practice, leaving room for imagination. You notice the subtle integration of communal effort. Each family tends their plots, but canals and embankments require cooperation. Water must be shared, timing coordinated. There is no written law, only social expectation and practical necessity. Watching, you sense an unspoken understanding the lake provides, but it also demands fairness. One mismanaged canal or neglected field could ripple outward, affecting neighbours and the community at large. Survival depends on trust, observation, and subtle negotiation. As afternoon light softens, you move to higher ground and survey the fields from a distance. The pattern is mesmerizing. A checkerboard of water, mud, and green growth. It's art disguised as practicality. Your breath slows as you absorb the sight, the gentle hum of water and wind filling your ears. You understand why this system endured for centuries, influencing future agricultural development across the Andes. The lake doesn't just reflect light, it reflects human ingenuity, patience, and quiet problem-solving. Evening arrives and shadows stretch across the raised fields. Farmers begin closing their channels, inspecting embankments, and tending to small storage mounds. You notice a subtle calm settling over the landscape. The raised fields have done their job, protecting crops, guiding water, and sustaining life. And as you stand in the fading light, you realize that the daily rhythm of labor, observation, and adaptation here is as much a survival strategy as it is a cultural statement. Every mound, canal, and furrow carries the quiet wisdom of generations who understood that life at high altitude requires both courage and care. You begin to notice a subtle shift as days turn into seasons and seasons quietly stack on top of one another. The villages around the lake feel the same at first, calm, cooperative, unhurried, but something is changing beneath the surface. Paths grow wider, platforms become more carefully aligned. Certain places draw people more often than others. Without walls, banners, or battle cries, Tiwanaku begins to rise, not as a conquest, but as a quiet centre of gravity. You walk toward one such gathering place, where the ground has been levelled with unusual care. Stones here are larger, fitted together with intention rather than convenience. People arrive from different lakeside settlements, recognizable by subtle differences in clothing patterns and pottery designs. No one looks afraid. There are no guards, no weapons on display. A mainstream historical fact is that Tiwanaku expanded largely without evidence of large-scale warfare, which is rare enough in ancient history to make scholars raise an eyebrow and then argue about it for decades. You feel the atmosphere change. Conversations are softer here, more deliberate. Elders from different communities speak in turn. Their voices steady. Their posture relaxed but attentive. Decisions seem to emerge from consensus rather than command. You realize that power here doesn't announce itself loudly. It persuades. It organizes. It provides solutions that make life easier, and in return, people keep showing up. That's how Tiwanaku grows, by being useful. Stoneworking advances noticeably. You pause beside a block so cleanly cut that your fingers trace its edge without catching. This isn't decorative excess, it's precision meant to last. Platforms are aligned with the land, the lake, and possibly the sky. Historians still argue whether Tiwanaku's planners followed a strict cosmological blueprint or simply refined practical layouts over generations. But standing here, you sense a confidence that wasn't present before. Someone knows what they're doing, and others trust them. You watch as food arrives from surrounding areas, dried potatoes, fish, grains, offered not as tribute, but as participation. Storage spaces grow larger, more centralized. Redistribution happens quietly, efficiently. This is one of Tiwanaku's strengths. It manages surplus. In good years, excess is stored. In bad years, it's shared. You imagine someone joking softly about how their potatoes are now everyone's potatoes, earning a few tired smiles. Even ancient economic systems appreciate humor. There are rituals too, but they feel inclusive rather than intimidating. Ceremonial spaces are open, designed to gather people rather than exclude them. Offerings are made to the lake, the sun, the ancestors, not with fear, but with familiarity. A quirky tidbit you might enjoy is that some ritual vessels depict abstract faces that look oddly calm, almost bored, as if even the gods here prefer a relaxed pace. Scholars still debate whether these expressions were intentional symbolism or just a stylistic quirk, but either way, they fit the mood. You notice that Tiwanaku doesn't replace local identity, it layers over it. Villages keep their customs, their layouts, their rhythms. What changes is coordination. Calendars align, agricultural cycles synchronize, ceremonial dates become shared reference points. The lake remains central, but now it's part of a broader system. You feel the satisfaction of efficiency spreading, not rigid control, but gentle order. As you walk through expanding spaces, you realize how unusual this is. No walls, no moats, no signs warning outsiders to keep away. Tiwanaku seems confident that people want to be here. And they do. Trade routes thicken, foot traffic increases, and ideas circulate freely. Tools improve. Building techniques refine. The place feels like a conversation that keeps getting better, because more voices are included. Of course, uncertainty lingers. Historians still argue whether Tiwanaku's rise was driven primarily by religion, agriculture, or administrative genius. Standing here, you suspect it's a blend of all three, mixed with something harder to measure: trust. People believe this place will help them survive, and belief, once established, is a powerful building material. As evening settles, fires glow across the expanded settlement, reflecting faintly off stone surfaces that will one day puzzle archaeologists. You stand quietly, listening to the low murmur of voices, the distant lap of the lake, the wind moving through reeds. Tiwanaku hasn't announced itself as an empire. It hasn't declared dominance. It has simply become essential. And as you breathe in the thin, cooling air, you understand that this quiet rise, this power without spectacle, is exactly what makes Tiwanaku so enduring and so hard to fully explain. You feel the movement before you fully see it. Footsteps on packed earth, the low murmur of voices arriving and departing, the soft snort of llamas shifting their loads. Tiwanaku hums now, not loudly, but constantly, and the reason becomes clear as you follow the paths leading outward from the lake. These are not just local tracks anymore. They are routes, thin, persistent lines stretching across valleys, up slopes, and over passes that look unforgiving even in daylight. You walk alongside a caravan as it sets out at dawn. Llamas move patiently, their hooves sure on uneven ground, bundles secured with practiced knots. Woven textiles sway with each step, dyed in earthy reds and deep blues. Dried fish from the lake, chuo, potatoes freeze-dried by night frost and day sun, ceramics, stone tools. This is a mainstream historical fact. Tiwanaku sat at the center of an extensive trade network, moving goods across hundreds of miles of the Andes without wheels, horses, or metal tools. It's slow trade, but reliable. And reliability is everything at altitude. The air thins as you climb with them. Conversation comes in short bursts, punctuated by long silences. You sense an understanding among the travelers. Talk when you can, breathe when you must. Someone cracks a quiet joke about how the llamas have better balance than people, earning a tired laugh. Humor travels well. It weighs nothing and makes the journey feel shorter. As the landscape opens, you notice how Tiwanaku's influence isn't stamped aggressively onto the land. Instead, it appears in small familiar signs, pottery patterns repeated far from the lake, shared tool shapes, similar weaving techniques. You recognize these markers like a signature. People along the route don't seem conquered, they seem connected. Historians still argue whether Tiwanaku controlled these regions politically or simply anchored a web of mutual exchange, but walking here, it feels cooperative, not coerced. You stop at a way station, little more than a sheltered hollow with stacked stones and a fire pit blackened by years of use. Travelers rest here, share food, exchange news. You listen as someone speaks of weather changes near a distant valley. Another mentions a ceremony timed with the sun's movement. Information flows alongside goods, and in many ways, it's the more valuable cargo. Knowing when frost comes, where water runs low, which paths are safe, this knowledge keeps people alive. Back near the lake, boats glide silently across the water. Reed vessels carry goods along the shoreline, connecting communities faster than land routes ever could. You watch one approach, its bow slicing cleanly through the surface, and imagine how these boats extend Tiwanaku's reach without a single road being built. A quirky tidbit scholars love is that these reed boats are buoyant enough that if one layer absorbs water, the inner layers keep it afloat. Basically, ancient redundancy engineering. Even modern designers would approve, once they get past the made of reeds part. You follow a trader inland this time, away from the comforting presence of the lake. The terrain shifts to rolling high plains, then into valleys where crops differ slightly, accents change, and customs bend without breaking. Goods from Tiwanaku are welcomed here not because they're flashy, but because they're dependable. Textiles keep people warm, pottery stores food safely. Stone tools last. Tiwanaku exports practicality, and in return, it receives metals, exotic stones, shells from distant coasts. Yes, coasts. The network reaches that far. You pause, letting that sink in. From this cold, high-altitude lake, connections stretch all the way to warm, salty air. Shells travel uphill, potatoes travel downhill. Ideas move in all directions. Historians still debate how often these journeys occurred and who organized them, but there's no question they happened. You're standing in the evidence, worn paths etched by repetition. As evening approaches, you notice small ritual gestures woven into trade. A traveller leaves a token stone at a pass. Another pauses briefly, touching the ground before continuing. These acts aren't dramatic. They're habitual, acknowledgements of risk and gratitude. Travel here is dangerous. Weather shifts fast. Altitude punishes carelessness. Yet people keep moving, because connection outweighs comfort. You walk back toward Tiwanaku as night falls, retracing routes now familiar. Fires appear in the distance, marking homes, way stations, temporary camps. Each light represents a node in the network, a place where stories and goods pause before moving on. The lake reappears, dark and calm, reflecting stars like scattered trade goods across black water. Back within Tiwanaku's growing center, storage areas are fuller now, goods from a far rest beside local harvests. There's a quiet confidence in abundance, not excess, but enough. Redistribution happens smoothly, no shouting, no tallies shouted aloud. People know what's needed. Systems have formed, subtle but effective. You sense how trade has changed the place. It's broadened perspectives, introduced new materials, new styles, but it hasn't erased the lake-centered identity. Instead, it's reinforced it. Tiwanaku isn't powerful because it takes. It's powerful because it connects, because it sits patiently at a crossroads and lets movement do the work. As you settle near the water once more, listening to the soft lap of waves, you understand that these routes, over land and water, are the veins of the civilization. They carry sustenance, knowledge, and trust. And as your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the lake, you feel those connections stretching outward into the dark, steady and enduring, linking distant lives in a quiet, unstoppable flow. You slow your steps as the paths lead you back into spaces that feel different now, quieter, heavier, with intention. Here, the stonework changes. Blocks are larger, surfaces smoother, edges sharper than anything you've seen so far. You pause, instinctively lowering your voice, even though no one has asked you to. This is where skill turns into mystery, where Tiwanaku's knowledge stops feeling purely practical and starts brushing against something harder to explain. You run your hand along a stone face so finely cut that it feels almost soft. No mortar fills the seams, yet the blocks sit together perfectly, as if grown rather than placed. A mainstream historical fact settles in: Tiwanaku masons achieved astonishing precision using stone tools long before metal chisels were common in the region. The tolerances are so tight that even today, a thin blade struggles to slip between stones. You exhale slowly, realizing how much patience this would require. No rushing, no shortcuts, just time and understanding. As you wander deeper, you notice alignments. Platforms face specific directions. Openings frame parts of the horizon. When the sun rises or sets, light falls exactly where it seems meant to. You imagine standing here on a solstice morning, watching sunlight creep across stone until it touches a carved surface. Historians still argue whether Tiwanaku's builders followed a formal astronomical system or relied on long-term observation passed down through generations. Standing here, you don't need certainty. The sky clearly mattered. Carved figures appear on pillars and slabs, faces staring forward, eyes wide, expressions calm but unreadable. Some hold objects that look like staffs or tools, others clutch abstract shapes that resist easy explanation. A quirky tidbit scholars often point out is that some of these figures seem oddly symmetrical, almost mirrored, as if reflecting duality, day and night, lake and land, life and death. Whether symbolic or stylistic, the effect is unsettling in a gentle, bedtime-appropriate way. You linger near a structure where sound behaves strangely. A soft footstep echoes longer than expected. A whispered word seems to travel farther than it should. You test it quietly, just to be sure, and yes, there's something deliberate here. Some researchers suggest these spaces were designed with acoustics in mind, amplifying ritual speech or music. Others argue it's coincidence. Historians still debate it, but your ears tell you that whoever built this place understood how sound moves through stone. Tools lie nearby, simple in form yet capable of extraordinary results. Hammerstones, abrasives, measuring cords. Nothing flashy, no lost super technology hiding under a tarp. And yet, the results feel advanced. You imagine a master stoneworker teaching an apprentice, correcting angles, demonstrating pressure, insisting on patience. Again, they might say calmly as the sun slides across the sky. Skill here is slow, cumulative, almost meditative. Astronomy threads through daily life more than you expected. You notice markers that could track the sun's movement, perhaps even the moon's. Planting seasons, ceremonies, and trade cycles likely depended on these observations. A mainstream fact confirms that Tiwanaku culture placed strong emphasis on celestial cycles. What remains uncertain is how formalized their system was. Did they have specialists who watched the sky nightly, or was this knowledge shared broadly among the people? Scholars still argue, and the stones, as usual, keep their answers to themselves. You sit for a moment, letting the place settle around you. The lake glints in the distance, ever-present, reflecting sky and stone alike. It's easy to see how myth would grow here. Precision invites speculation. Silence invites imagination. Over time, stories accumulate. Stones cut by gods, knowledge lost in floods, builders guided by stars alone. You smile faintly. Humans have always been good at turning patience into legend. As evening approaches, shadows stretch across carvings, changing their expressions. Faces that looked calm now appear stern, others soften. The place feels alive, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, breathing sense. You realize that this knowledge, stonework, astronomy, spatial design isn't separate from daily life. It's woven into it. Ritual isn't an interruption here. It's a continuation. You stand and walk once more among the stones, your steps unhurried. There's comfort in not knowing everything, in letting mystery remain gentle and unresolved. Tiwanaku doesn't shout its secrets. It hums them quietly, trusting that time will carry them forward, even if understanding doesn't. As the sky deepens to indigo and the first stars appear, you feel the pull of rest. The stones cool, the air sharpens, and the lake reflects pinpoints of light. Knowledge here doesn't rush you. It invites you to slow down, to observe, to accept that some answers arrive only when you stop asking so hard. And with that thought, you let your shoulders relax, breathing evenly, standing among skills and knowledge that still whisper across centuries, content to remain just a little out of reach. You sense the change before anyone names it. The lake still breathes in its familiar rhythm, the stones still hold their lines, but something in the air feels tighter, less forgiving. Seasons begin to slip out of sync. Rains arrive late, or not at all. Frost lingers longer in the mornings. You walk the familiar paths and notice quieter fields, canals that carry less water, raised beds that need more careful tending. Nothing collapses all at once. Decline here arrives politely, almost apologetically. You stand beside the lake and watch the waterline. It sits lower than before, exposing bands of pale shoreline that haven't seen daylight in generations. A mainstream historical fact confirms that the region experienced significant climate fluctuations, including prolonged droughts, during Tiwanaku's later period. These shifts didn't just inconvenience the people, they strained the systems that had kept everything balanced. Raised fields depend on predictable water. Trade depends on surplus. Ritual depends on faith that patterns will repeat. When patterns break, doubt creeps in. You walk through the fields and notice the effort intensifying. Farmers adjust canals, deepen channels, rebuild embankments. Cooperation still exists, but it feels heavier now, less automatic. Everyone is working harder to maintain what once came more easily. You hear fewer jokes, more sighs. Someone mutters about how the lake used to sit right there, pointing to a spot now dry and cracked. Memory becomes a measuring stick, and the present rarely measures up. Storage areas tell their own quiet story. Bins that once overflowed now sit half full. Redistribution still happens, but with more careful calculation. Who needs what most? Who can wait? These are uncomfortable questions, and they hang in the air like smoke that doesn't quite clear. Historians still argue whether internal social tensions grew during this period, or whether cooperation held firm until the very end. Standing here, you suspect it's both. Solidarity stretched thin, not snapped. Ritual spaces feel different too. Ceremonies continue, offerings are made, but there's an undercurrent of urgency. People linger longer, watching the sky, searching for signs. A quirky but telling detail archaeologists note is an increase in certain ceremonial objects during this time, possibly indicating intensified religious activity. Whether this reflects hope, fear or habit is still debated. You watch someone place an offering carefully, their hands steady, their expression quietly pleading. Trade routes begin to thin. You notice fewer caravans arriving, fewer boats crossing the lake. Long-distance exchange relies on surplus, and surplus is harder to spare now. Paths don't disappear overnight, they simply see less traffic. A way station fire burns lower than usual. Someone mentions a route that hasn't been used in a while because water sources along it dried up. Information still travels, but the news isn't encouraging. You walk among the stone structures that once felt so confident. They remain solid, unmoved by human worry. That contrast is unsettling. The stones keep their alignments. The carvings keep their calm expressions. It's the people who shift, adapting, reconsidering, quietly planning alternatives. Some families begin to spend more time away from the lake, exploring valleys with more reliable rainfall. Others talk about staying, about loyalty to ancestors and place. Neither choice feels easy. You pause near a familiar platform and listen. The hum of daily life is softer now. Fewer voices overlap. Children still play, but their games are interrupted more often by chores. Elders speak more frequently, recounting earlier times when conditions were better, not as nostalgia, but as instruction. This worked before, they seem to say. Maybe it will again. Scholars still debate how sudden or gradual Tiwanaku's decline was, but walking here, it feels like a long exhale rather than a collapse. As seasons pass, departures become more noticeable. Not dramatic migrations, just slow thinning. A house stands empty for a while, then its materials are reused. A field lies fallow longer than planned. The lake remains, but it no longer anchors everything as securely as it once did. You realize that abandonment doesn't mean failure. It means choice. Survival sometimes requires leaving behind even the most carefully built systems. You stand at the edge of the settlement at dusk, watching the sun lower over the water. The light still turns the lake bronze, just as it always has. Beauty hasn't left. But the future feels less certain. Tiwanaku's quiet strength, its cooperation, its patience, faces a test it can't fully negotiate with ingenuity alone. As the first stars appear, you feel a gentle melancholy settle in. Not tragedy, not panic, just the recognition that even the most elegant solutions have limits. And as the night deepens, you sense that the lake, patient as ever, will outlast this moment, holding the memory of those who stayed, those who left, and the slow, human process of deciding when it's time to move on. You return to the heart of Tiwanaku one last time, and the place feels different now. Not empty, not ruined, just quieter, as if it's learned how to wait. Stones stand where they always have, catching the light in familiar ways. Platforms still align with the land and sky. The lake breathes steadily nearby, unconcerned with human timelines. You walk slowly, aware that what remains is not an ending, but a pause stretched across centuries. You pass through spaces that once gathered crowds. Footprints are fewer, but not absent. Some people still come here seasonally, tending rituals, remembering ancestors, maintaining connections even as daily life shifts elsewhere. A mainstream historical fact is that Tiwanaku was not violently destroyed, it was gradually left behind. There are no widespread burn layers, no evidence of sudden conquest. The silence you feel now is earned, not imposed. You stop near a familiar stone carving, its face calm and unreadable. It hasn't changed, but you have. You understand now that these stones were never meant to shout power. They were meant to endure, to remind, to anchor memory in a landscape where people came and went as conditions allowed. Historians still argue about the final years, whether ritual intensified, whether leadership fractured, whether climate alone tipped the balance. But certainty feels unnecessary here. The place doesn't demand answers, it simply exists. As centuries pass in your imagination, the lake remains a constant witness. New cultures arrive. Old stories soften. Some knowledge fades, other parts resurface unexpectedly, carried in farming techniques, boat designs, oral traditions. A quirky modern tidbit, local communities still recognize Tiwanaku as a sacred place, not a ruin, and ceremonies continue nearby. The past hasn't vanished, it's just learned to share space with the present. You walk among the ruins at dusk, modern sky blending with ancient stone. The wind moves through gaps where roofs once stood, creating low, breath-like sounds. It's easy to see why mystery clings here. Precision without written explanation invites imagination. Silence invites speculation. And yet, the truth feels gentler than the legends. This was a place built by people solving problems together, one season at a time. You sit near the lake's edge, the same spot where the journey began. Water laps softly, reflecting the fading light. The raised fields are quiet now, slowly returning to marsh. Reeds reclaim old channels. Nature doesn't erase, it absorbs. You realize that Tiwanaku didn't fail. It adapted until adaptation meant dispersal. Its success wasn't permanence, but resilience passed outward. The air cools noticeably as night settles in. Stars emerge, sharp and numerous, just as they did for the first lakeside settlers. You feel the continuity in that simple fact. Sky, water, stone, human presence flickering in between. And now, the pace slows even more. The fire nearby burns lower, embers glowing softly, red and orange pulsing like a steady heartbeat. You warm your hands, feeling the contrast between heat and the crisp night air. The lake reflects starlight in broken lines, each ripple stretching and releasing the image. The wind eases, and with it, your thoughts loosen their grip. History fades into sensation. Stone becomes texture. Water becomes sound. Time becomes less important than warmth, breath, and stillness. You imagine the people who once sat like this, after long days of farming, trading, building, letting the night carry their worries away. Different centuries, same tired exhale. The embers dim further, glowing quietly, asking nothing of you. Your shoulders relax, breathing slows. The lake keeps its secrets, but it also offers rest. You don't need to solve anything tonight. You don't need to remember every detail. The story can hold itself now. As the fire settles into ash and the stars wheel gently overhead, you let the images soften. Stones blur into shadow. Water darkens. The high, cold air feels less sharp, more comforting. Safe. Steady. You're warm. You're still, and just like the lake, you're allowed to rest. Good night. Sweet dreams.